February 1945. A Japanese commander on Iwo Jima watches through binoculars as American landing craft approach the volcanic beaches. Something catches his attention. Black faces among the assault troops. This should not be possible. Japanese intelligence has studied American military structure carefully. They know the United States military is rigidly segregated. They know black soldiers are relegated to support roles only. They know, or think they know, that Negro troops would never be allowed in frontline combat. Thousands of miles away in the mountains of northern Italy, German officers at the Gothic Line receive reports that make them laugh. The Americans are sending their weakest troops against our strongest fortress, Negro soldiers. Former railroad porters playing at war, they will break at the first shot. In the jungles of the Pacific, Japanese propaganda leaflets fall from the sky with a message for black American soldiers. Your country does not respect you. Why fight for them? Surrender. We will treat you better than America does. Embedded in that message is a deeper assumption. Black soldiers are inferior fighters. They lack courage. They are cowards who will break under pressure. What none of these Axis commanders understood was that they were about to face men who carried a burden heavier than their weapons. Men fighting two wars simultaneously, one against the enemy in front of them, another against the racism behind them. Men who had been told their entire lives they were not good enough, not brave enough, not capable enough. Men who were about to prove, in blood and fire, that courage has no color. This is the story of three epic battles where racist assumptions met devastating reality, where black American soldiers fighting for a country that denied them equality shattered the prejudices of enemies who dismissed them and allies who doubted them. By the time these battles ended, over 30,000 enemy soldiers would be casualties. 3 impregnable positions would fall, and the myth of racial superiority in combat would lie buried in volcanic ash, mountain snow, and jungle mud. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear the stories they tried to bury for 80 years. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. These are the truths about who really fought and died for America. To understand what happened on these battlefields, you first need to understand the America that sent these men to war. The United States military in World War II was as segregated as the Jim Crow South. This was not unofficial policy hidden in practice. It was official, documented, and defended at the highest levels of military leadership. The United States Marine Corps maintained the strictest racial barrier. From its founding in 1775 until June 1942, the Marines accepted only white recruits. The unofficial motto among recruiters was clear: the Marine Corps is looking for a few good men, and by men we mean white men. When pressure mounted during World War II to integrate the armed forces, Marine Corps commanders argued that racial integration would undermine unit cohesion, that white Marines would not fight alongside black men, that the elite reputation depended on exclusivity. President Franklin Roosevelt's Executive Order 8802 in 1941 prohibiting racial discrimination in defense industries and military service created pressure the Marine Corps could no longer resist. In June 1942, the Marines reluctantly began accepting black recruits for the first time in the Corps' 167-year history, but acceptance did not mean equality. The Marine Corps created a separate training facility at Montford Point, North Carolina, geographically isolated from the main training base at Camp Lejeune. Black recruits trained in segregated units, lived in segregated barracks, and were explicitly told they would serve in support roles only, never in combat infantry positions. The first black Marines who completed training in 1942 were assigned to depot companies and ammunition companies, units designated for loading supplies, handling munitions, and supporting combat operations from rear areas. The assignments were not accidental. Marine Corps leadership believed black men lacked the intelligence, courage, and discipline for frontline combat. Training reflected these assumptions. While white Marine recruits trained in infantry tactics and assault procedures, black Marines received training focused on loading techniques, supply management, and manual labor. The message was unmistakable: you are here to serve, not to fight. By early 1945, approximately 19,000 black men had enlisted in the Marine Corps. Not one had been assigned to a combat infantry regiment. Not one had been given the opportunity to prove themselves in battle alongside white Marines. The United States Army was slightly less restrictive, but only slightly. The Army activated black combat divisions, but ensured they served under predominantly white officers. Many of these officers came from southern states where segregation was law and brought their prejudices with them. The 92nd Infantry Division activated in October 1942 at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. 15,000 black soldiers organized into infantry regiments. Their shoulder patch bore a black buffalo, honoring the legendary Buffalo Soldiers of the Frontier Army. But pride could not overcome systematic obstacles. Private First Class Vernon Baker later recalled, "Some officers made it clear they expected us to fail. They told us directly that colored soldiers could not fight, could not lead, could not handle combat pressure. We trained twice as hard to prove them wrong, knowing we would get half the credit. Training proved brutal. Temperatures exceeded 110 degrees in Arizona's desert, yet the division received inferior equipment. World War I surplus rifles, limited ammunition, the worst vehicles." Staff Sergeant Edward A. Carter Jr. wrote, "They give us the oldest rifles, the worst trucks, and officers who have never seen combat. Then they wonder why we are not ready. But we will be ready. We have to be." The 93rd Infantry Division faced similar conditions when it activated in May 1942, also at Fort Huachuca. Like all black units, it faced systematic discrimination, inferior equipment, inadequate training facilities, lower priority for supplies. But the men of these divisions had something to prove. They knew they were under a microscope. One failure would be used to justify continued segregation. One mistake would be magnified across the entire black community. The racism extended beyond training. Black soldiers in uniform were refused service at restaurants where German prisoners of war ate freely. The contradiction burned. Fighting for freedom abroad while denied basic dignity at home. Yet these men volunteered. They endured the discrimination because they believed military service would advance the cause of civil rights, that proving their worth in uniform would challenge the racism that denied them equality at home. They also believed, despite official policy, that they would eventually get their chance to fight. Historical records document the frustration among black soldiers denied combat roles. Letters home expressed their determination to prove themselves if given the opportunity. Training logs show soldiers practicing infantry tactics in their spare time. Preparing for combat roles they were officially prohibited from filling. They would not have to wait long. The brutal mathematics of World War II would soon make segregation policies unsustainable. December 26. Monte Belvedere, Northern Apennines, Italy. Through morning fog, Oberst Heinrich von Schweinberg watched American troops advancing toward his fortress. His briefing officer had reported with contempt, "The Americans have sent us their weakest troops, Negroes." Former railroad porters playing soldier. Von Schweinberg, a Stalingrad veteran, studied the men through field glasses. The 370th Infantry Regiment, part of the United States Army's 92nd Infantry Division, an all-black unit sent to assault the most formidable German defensive position in Italy, the Gothic Line. 200 miles of fortifications that Field Marshal Kesselring had spent 2 years building. The line incorporated 2,376 machine gun nests, 479 anti-tank positions, 120,000 meters of barbed wire, and extensive minefields. Wehrmacht propaganda had prepared German soldiers to expect quick surrender from black American troops. Nazi racial theories declared African soldiers inherently inferior in combat, lacking discipline and courage for sustained fighting. What von Schweinberg did not know was that marching toward his mountain fortress were men who had endured challenges no German soldier could imagine. They had fought racism in their own army, trained with inadequate equipment, served under officers who expected them to fail. Within 48 hours, von Schweinberg would send an urgent message to Field Marshal Kesselring's headquarters, a message that would force German commanders to reassess everything they believed about racial combat capabilities. The centerpiece of German defenses was Monte Belvedere, rising 3,830 feet above the Serchio Valley. From its summit, German observation posts could see 50 miles in every direction, calling artillery fire on any movement with devastating accuracy. Von Schweinberg had supervised construction personally. Concrete bunkers with 3-foot walls protected machine gun crews. Mortars sat in covered pits invisible to aerial reconnaissance. The mountain multiplied German effectiveness. A single machine gun could control an entire valley. Lieutenant Hans Becker wrote to his wife, "The Americans would need wings to reach us. The slopes are so steep that climbing without enemy fire would be difficult. Under fire, I cannot imagine how they could advance. The Negro troops they are sending will die before they reach our wire." German intelligence on the 92nd Infantry Division reflected Nazi racial prejudices. A November 1944 assessment stated, "American Negro units lack combat motivation. They will advance until meeting serious resistance, then retreat or surrender. Division is suitable only for defensive operations or garrison duties." This was not based on combat observation. It reflected Nazi ideology that declared non-Aryans inherently inferior. Wehrmacht training manuals advised, offer strong initial resistance. Negro troops will panic and flee. Their white officers will be unable to restore order. These assumptions created dangerous overconfidence. Weather became a German ally. Temperatures ranged from 40 degrees during the day to below freezing at night. Rain fell constantly, turning trails to mud. Morning fog prevented air support. Trench foot became epidemic. The 90-second medical reports showed 847 cases serious enough for evacuation in November alone. Allied artillery and air support proved inadequate. Ammunition shortages plagued Italian operations. The 92nd received only 30% of requested ammunition, while priority went to France. Air support averaged fewer than 10 sorties daily compared to 100 plus in Northwest Europe. The Buffalo Soldiers studied their objective, knowing they would assault with inadequate preparation. They would attack at numerical parity, not the 3-to-1 superiority that doctrine required. Success depended on courage, determination, and accepting casualties that would horrify commanders who valued their soldiers equally. But these soldiers were not valued equally. They knew it. The Germans knew it. Failure would confirm every racist assumption. That burden was heavier than the equipment they carried. December 26, 1944. 0600 hours. The attack would begin in darkness on ice-covered slopes against an enemy expecting them to fail. December 26, 0545 hours. Absolute darkness on Monte Belvedere's lower slopes. Men of Company C, 370th Infantry Regiment checked equipment one final time. Every man carried 60 pounds up slopes where mountain goats struggled. Staff Sergeant Carter whispered final instructions. Stay low until artillery stops. Watch for mines. When we reach the wire, Bangalore torpedoes go first. Follow me through. If I go down, the next man takes over. We keep moving until we reach the top, or we are all dead. At 0600. American artillery opened fire, 2,400 rounds in 15 minutes, the maximum allowed. In his command bunker, von Schweinberg smiled. Only 15 minutes. The Americans are weaker than we thought. The Negro troops are coming. When artillery stopped, 30 seconds of silence. Then American voices shouted, "Move out," and the Buffalo Soldiers began their climb. The slopes averaged 45-degree angles, steep enough that soldiers grabbed vegetation and rocks to pull themselves upward. Some sections exceeded 60 degrees. Men carried rifles slung, needing both hands to climb. Combat loads became torturous after 100 yards of vertical ascent. Private James Hicks described it. You would climb 10 steps and need to rest, gasping. Your legs burned. Your shoulders ached. You knew if you stopped too long, you would never start again. So you climbed one step at a time, listening for the sound that meant Germans spotted you. Machine guns opening fire. That sound came at 0623. German MG-42s, firing 1,200 rounds per minute, swept slopes with interlocking fire. The first bursts caught Company C's lead platoon 400 yards from the summit. Men dropped, some hit, others seeking cover that did not exist. Sergeant Carter saw 3 men cut down in the first seconds. Keep moving. They cannot hit what is moving. Go. German mortar fire arrived next, walking down the mountain, but the Buffalo Soldiers did not break. They kept climbing, using fire and maneuver tactics that white officers assumed they could not master. At 0647, Company C reached German wire. Bangalore torpedoes blew gaps through defenses. Germans responded with grenades. Private Vernon Baker, leading his squad through a breach, encountered a German machine gun firing down the gap. Baker charged the position alone, killing the 3-man crew with rifle fire and grenades. His squad rushed through, expanding the breach. Company B, attacking from the northwest, faced even worse terrain, a 70-degree rock face requiring ropes. German defenders, assuming no one would attack there, left the sector lightly defended. Captain John Runyon exploited this, leading his men up the cliff in darkness. At 0715, Company B's lead elements reached the summit ridge, the first Americans to penetrate the Gothic Line's main defenses. German defenders, shocked, fell back, but Runyon's company was isolated, exposed to counterattacks from 3 directions. Von Schweinberg refused to believe reports initially. Negro troops cannot have reached the summit. When confirmation came, his confidence shattered. He ordered immediate counterattack. 120 elite assault troops. The counterattack hit at 0745. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in fog and smoke. Soldiers fought with rifle butts and entrenching tools when ammunition ran out. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, leading a platoon, charged into enemy fire when Germans threatened to overwhelm his position. He killed 7 German soldiers with his bar before being killed himself. His sacrifice gave Company B time to reorganize and hold. By 0830, Company B still held their foothold. 34 killed. 52 wounded out of 97 who attacked, but they had not broken. Germans, expecting Negro troops to flee, faced soldiers fighting with ferocity that stunned them. Lieutenant Becker later wrote, "We killed many, but they kept coming. We threw them back, but they attacked again. These were not the weak soldiers our intelligence described. They fought like demons." We began to understand racial theories were lies, but learned this truth too late. Throughout the day, additional companies assaulted Monte Belvedere. By 1400 hours, American soldiers held multiple summit positions. Artillery support improved as forward observers called fire from the peak. The battle raged through December 26th and 27th. German counterattacks came every few hours, determined efforts to throw Americans off the summit. Each was beaten back by soldiers who refused to descend defeated. Ammunition ran low. Food was non-existent. Water froze. Men fought on adrenaline and determination. By December 28th, the 371st Infantry Regiment controlled Monte Belvedere's summit. Germans, recognizing they could not dislodge Americans, withdrew to secondary positions. The Gothic Line's western anchor was cracked. The cost was devastating. The 370th suffered 573 casualties out of 2,800 engaged. Company B was reduced to 31 effectives from 97, but they had succeeded where German commanders said Negro troops must fail. Private Baker, surveying the battlefield December 29th. Bodies everywhere, ours and theirs, frozen where they fell. Some of our men climbed wounded, bleeding, dying, but still climbing because stopping meant the man behind you died. We proved something on that mountain. We proved we could fight. But my God, the cost. German assessments underwent immediate revision. A January 1945 intelligence report to Kesselring stated, American Negro units demonstrate combat effectiveness equal to white divisions. Previous assessments based on racial theory were incorrect. These troops fight with determination and accept casualties that would break lesser units. January 1945 brought savage winter. Temperatures plunged to 10 degrees at night. Snow accumulated to 3 feet. Wind speeds exceeded 40 miles per h, driving wind chill to -20. Monte Castello, connected to Belvedere by narrow ridge, became the next objective. Germans reinforced after losing Belvedere. The assault began January 24th with critical support. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the highly decorated Japanese-American unit, attached to the division. The tactical plan reflected lessons learned. Night attacks would exploit American advantages while negating German artillery. Most importantly, the offensive would continue regardless of casualties until objectives were secure. Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Miller briefed commanders, "We are taking Monte Castello and holding it. Period. I do not care how many counterattacks they throw. We are staying on that mountain until relieved or dead. Make sure your men understand there is no falling back." The night attack jumped off at 0400 on February 19th. The 442nd struck from the north while the 370th assaulted from the east. The combination of Japanese Americans fighting to prove loyalty and black soldiers fighting to prove equality created overwhelming force. By 0630, both units reached Monte Castello's summit simultaneously. German defenders attempted counterattacks but faced attackers already dug in. Positions that had dominated approaches for months were overrun. Von Schweinberg sent urgent message to Kesselring. Monte Castello lost. American Negro and Japanese units fighting with exceptional determination. Gothic Line Western Sector compromised. Request permission to withdraw. Kesselring denied it. Hold at all costs. Monte della Turraccia must not fall, but von Schweinberg knew his position was untenable. The final assault on Monte della Turraccia came February 21st. 3 regiments supported by the 442nd, British artillery, and for the first time in weeks, clear weather allowing air support. P-47s strafed German positions while B-25s dropped 500-pound bombs on bunkers. The combined assault shattered German resistance in 6 hours. By 1800 on February 21st, American soldiers controlled all 3 peaks. The Gothic Line's western anchor had fallen to troops German propaganda said could not fight. The cost was staggering. December 26th through February 21st, the 92nd suffered 2,187 casualties, 419 killed, 1,611 wounded, 157 missing. Individual companies reduced to 40% strength, but German losses were catastrophic differently. They lost positions that could never be retaken. The Gothic Line's integrity was broken. Kesselring's defensive masterpiece had a gaping wound through which Allied forces would pour. A captured German officer, interrogated February 23rd, stated, "We were told colored soldiers would run at first shot. Instead, They climbed mountains under fire that should have stopped any attack. They suffered casualties that would have broken German units and kept advancing. I fought Soviet Guards divisions on the Eastern Front. These Negro soldiers fought just as hard, maybe harder, because they seemed to have something to prove. With the Gothic Line broken, Fifth Army's spring offensive exploited gaps, driving toward the Po Valley and forcing German surrender in Italy on May 2, 1945. But the broader significance transcended military operations. The Buffalo Soldiers shattered assumptions about race and combat capability that had persisted for generations. They proved that when given adequate support and opportunity, black soldiers performed at the same level as any troops in the world. While the 92nd Infantry Division fought in Italy's mountains, another story was unfolding in the Pacific. A story where Japanese racial theories would meet even more devastating reality. The Empire of Japan in World War II was not just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting what they saw as a racial war, a war to establish Japanese dominance over Asia and prove the superiority of the Yamato race. This was not subtle. It was official military doctrine. Japanese propaganda portrayed the war as a conflict between the civilized Japanese and inferior races, Chinese, Filipinos, Malays. At the core of this ideology was a racial hierarchy that ranked all peoples. The Japanese saw themselves at the apex. Below them, other Asian peoples who could potentially be uplifted under Japanese guidance. At the very bottom, black people and indigenous peoples who Japanese racial theorists classified as barely human. This was not just prejudice. It was pseudoscientific racism codified into military training. Japanese soldiers were taught that certain races lack fighting spirit, intelligence, and courage. Black soldiers, they were specifically told, were cowardly by nature. They would break easily. They could not be trusted in combat. They were America's weakest link. When Japanese forces encountered black American soldiers early in the war, primarily service units, not combat troops, their racism seemed confirmed. These were not combat soldiers. They were working in supply, construction, and support roles. The Japanese saw this segregation and concluded, America knows black men cannot fight, so they used them as laborers. What the Japanese did not understand was that American segregation was not based on capability. It was based on racism. Black Americans were kept out of combat roles not because they could not fight, but because the United States military establishment did not want them to. By 1943, pressure from civil rights organizations and the need for more combat troops forced the Army to deploy black combat units to the Pacific. The 93rd Infantry Division would be the first. The 93rd was activated in May 1942 at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. It was composed primarily of black enlisted men with a mix of black and white officers. Like all black units, it faced systematic discrimination, inferior equipment, inadequate training facilities, lower priority for supplies. But the men of the 93rd had something to prove. They knew they were under a microscope. One failure would be used to justify continued segregation. One mistake would be magnified across the entire black community. They trained relentlessly. They knew they would be fighting two enemies, the Japanese in front of them and the racism behind them. In January 1944, the 93rd Infantry Division deployed to the Pacific. Their first stop, Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese had held portions of the island since 1942. The terrain was brutal, dense jungle, steep mountains, constant rain, malaria and other tropical diseases, and waiting for them were Japanese forces who had been told these black soldiers were cowards who would flee at the first sign of combat. The Japanese were about to learn how wrong they were. March 1944, the 93rd Infantry Division's 25th Infantry Regiment enters combat on Bougainville. The mission seems straightforward: relieve Marine units that have been fighting since November 1943, expand the American perimeter, and eliminate remaining Japanese forces in the jungle. But nothing about Bougainville is straightforward. The terrain is a nightmare. Jungles so dense you cannot see 10 feet ahead, mountains that rise nearly vertical, rivers that flash flood without warning, heat and humidity that make every movement exhausting, rain, constant drenching rain that turns trails to mud and makes resupply nearly impossible. The Japanese have been on Bougainville for 2 years. They know the terrain intimately. They have built fortified positions, bunkers reinforced with logs and earth, camouflaged so well you do not see them until you are on top of them. They have dug spider holes, individual fighting positions that allow a single soldier to pop up, fire, and disappear. They have also prepared psychologically. Japanese officers have told their troops they are facing inferior soldiers, black Americans who lack fighting spirit. The first serious attack, they are told, and these soldiers will break and run. The 93rd's first major engagement comes near the Torokina River. A Japanese patrol encounters an American patrol from the 25th Infantry. The Japanese, expecting cowardice, attack aggressively. What happens next shocks them. The American patrol does not retreat. They return fire with disciplined volleys. They maneuver tactically. They call in mortar support with precision. Within minutes, the Japanese patrol is pinned down and taking casualties. This is not what Japanese soldiers were told would happen. These are not cowards. These are trained infantry fighting with coordination and aggression. The skirmish escalates. More Japanese troops arrive. The 93rd soldiers hold their position, trading fire in jungles so thick they are often shooting at muzzle flashes rather than visible targets. The fight lasts 4 hours. When it ends, 23 Japanese soldiers are dead. The 93rd Patrol has suffered 3 wounded, none killed. But this is just the beginning. Over the next 3 months, the 93rd Infantry Division systematically pushes Japanese forces deeper into the Bougainville interior. It is brutal, grinding combat. Advances are measured in yards per WWII. Every hill is contested. Every trail is ambushed. The Japanese try everything. Night infiltration attacks designed to create panic. Banzai charges meant to overwhelm positions through sheer ferocity. Sniper harassment to wear down American morale. None of it works the way Japanese commanders expect. The night attacks are met with disciplined defensive fire. The 93rd soldiers had trained for this. They do not panic in darkness. They execute defensive procedures. Machine gun teams set up interlocking fields of fire. Mortar teams drop illumination rounds to expose attackers. The Banzai charges, suicidal frontal assaults, that sometimes break less experienced units, are cut down with methodical rifle and machine gun fire. The 93rd soldiers had been told what to expect. They trained to hold positions under assault. They do not break. The sniper harassment is countered by American counter-sniper teams, soldiers from rural backgrounds, men who grew up hunting in forests and swamps, become expert at tracking and eliminating Japanese snipers in the jungle. After 2 months of combat, Japanese commanders on Bougainville send reports back to headquarters. The reports are confused, sometimes contradictory, but the core message is clear. The intelligence about Black American soldiers was wrong. These troops are not inferior. They are fighting with skill and determination. One captured Japanese diary, translated by American intelligence, includes this entry: the enemy Negro troops fight with unexpected ferocity. They do not retreat when attacked. They pursue us when we withdraw. Command was mistaken about their capabilities. By June 1944, organized Japanese resistance on Bougainville has collapsed. The 93rd Infantry Division has pushed the remaining Japanese forces into isolated pockets in the island's mountainous interior. These pockets will hold out until the war's end, but they are no longer a threat to American operations. The cost to Japanese forces estimated 3,200 killed in action, with additional hundreds dying from disease and starvation as they are cut off from resupply. The 93rd suffers casualties too: 121 killed in action, 567 wounded, but they have achieved every objective. More importantly, they have shattered the myth. Black soldiers are not cowards. They are effective combat troops. But the Japanese military as a whole has not learned this lesson yet. They still believe Bougainville was an anomaly, that the reports from their commanders were exaggerated or mistaken. They are about to get a second, even more devastating lesson. September 1944. The 93rd Infantry Division deploys to Morotai, an island in the Dutch East Indies that will serve as a staging area for the liberation of the Philippines. By now, the 93rd has a reputation. Other American units that fought alongside them on Bougainville spread the word. These guys can fight. White officers who had been skeptical about commanding black troops have become fierce advocates, but the Japanese high command still has not adjusted their assessment. They still believe that black American soldiers are inferior, that Bougainville was an exception, that in sustained combat against experienced Japanese troops, the 93rd will fail. Morotai is supposed to be a relatively easy operation. Intelligence suggests light Japanese presence, maybe a few hundred troops. The invasion goes smoothly with minimal resistance. The island is secured quickly and engineers begin building airfields to support the Philippines campaign. But the Japanese are not done with Morotai. Throughout late 1944 and into 1945, Japanese forces continue to infiltrate the island. Small units slip through the American perimeter at night. They sabotage equipment. They attack supply convoys. They are trying to disrupt the airfields and slow the American advance toward the Philippines. The 93rd is assigned to eliminate these infiltrators and secure the island completely. This means patrolling dense jungle, setting ambushes, and hunting down Japanese troops who know the terrain and are fighting a guerrilla campaign. It is dangerous, Exhausting work. Patrols go out for days at a time. Soldiers sleep in the jungle, always on alert for ambush. They learn to move silently, to recognize signs of enemy presence, to set up hasty defensive positions when contact seems imminent, and they become extraordinarily good at it. The 93rd soldiers develop jungle warfare skills that rival the Japanese. They learn to track enemy movements by broken vegetation, disturbed ground, and even smell. Japanese soldiers use different rations and cleaning products than Americans, creating a distinctive scent in close jungle. One particularly successful tactic: setting ambushes along trails the Japanese use for nighttime movement. The 93rd soldiers would identify a likely path, set up a kill zone with machine guns and rifles positioned for overlapping fields of fire, and wait, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. When Japanese troops walked into these ambushes, the results were devastating. Entire patrols would be wiped out in seconds. The survivors would flee, often right into secondary ambush positions the 93rd had established. By December 1944, Japanese infiltration on Morotai has been substantially reduced. The 93rd has killed an estimated 850 Japanese soldiers in small unit actions over 3 months. American casualties are light, 28 killed, because the 93rd is fighting smart, using superior tactics and preparation. In January 1945, elements of the 93rd redeployed to support operations in the Philippines. The 25th Infantry Regiment lands on Luzon and participates in mopping up operations against Japanese forces that have been bypassed by the main American advance. The Philippines campaign is different from Bougainville and Morotai. The Japanese are not just defending, they are conducting a last-ditch resistance. Japanese commanders know they are losing the war. Many have embraced the idea of dying rather than surrendering. This makes them more dangerous, more unpredictable, more willing to take risks, but it also makes them less effective. Desperation is not strategy. The 93rd spends months in the Philippines conducting what the military calls mopping up operations, a sanitized term for brutal combat against bypassed Japanese units that refuse to surrender. These units range in size from a few dozen soldiers to several hundred. They are often dug into defensive positions in mountains or jungles, well supplied with ammunition and willing to fight to the death. The 93rd methodically reduces these positions. They use combined arms tactics: infantry to fix the Japanese in place, mortars and artillery to destroy fortifications, aggressive assault tactics to overwhelm defenders. It is slow, dangerous work. Every cave, every bunker, every spider hole has to be cleared, often by hand-to-hand combat. One particularly brutal engagement occurs in the Sierra Madre Mountains. The 93rd's 25th Infantry Regiment encounters a Japanese force estimated at 400 to 500 soldiers dug into mountain caves. The Japanese have supplies for months and artillery pieces positioned to command the approaches. The American assault takes 2 weeks. It is a daily grind of advancing under fire, taking casualties, calling in airstrikes and artillery, then advancing again. Flamethrower teams burn out cave positions. Engineers use explosives to collapse bunkers. Infantry assault teams crawl forward under covering fire to get close enough to throw grenades into defensive positions. The Japanese fight with fanatical determination. They launch counterattacks at night. They refuse to surrender even when their positions are hopeless. Some commit suicide rather than be captured, but the 93rd does not break. They do not retreat. They maintain pressure day after day until the last Japanese position is eliminated. Final casualty count for that 2-week battle: 347 Japanese killed, estimated 100+ wounded who subsequently died from wounds or withdrew deeper into the mountains. American casualties: 41 killed. By May 1945, when the war in the Philippines officially ends, the 93rd Infantry Division has been in continuous combat operations for 15 months. They have fought on Bougainville, Morotai, and Luzon. They have destroyed or captured over 8,000 Japanese soldiers directly, with additional thousands killed in operations they supported or participated in. The total Japanese casualties inflicted by or attributed to the 93rd Infantry Division's operations, estimated at over 12,000 killed, wounded, or captured for a single division. That is an extraordinary combat record, and every single one of those casualties was inflicted by soldiers the Japanese had been told were cowards. While the 93rd fought in the Pacific jungles and the 92nd battled in Italy's mountains, another crisis was developing that would force the most rigid segregation policy in the American military to collapse. February 19, 1945, Iwo Jima. Japanese gunners in reinforced concrete pillboxes watched the first wave of American landing craft approach the volcanic black beaches. Through binoculars, They observed something unexpected among the Marines storming ashore. Black American faces among the assault troops. Japanese commanders had studied American military structure carefully. They knew the United States military was rigidly segregated. They knew black soldiers were relegated to support roles, stevedores, supply handlers, drivers. They knew, or thought they knew, that Negro troops would never be allowed in frontline combat, especially not in the Marine Corps, which had only begun accepting black recruits 2 years earlier. What Japanese defenders did not know was that the very segregation they had observed had created a desperate situation. Black Marines trained as ammunition handlers and depot companies were about to become combat troops out of sheer necessity. The battle for Iwo Jima would require every man who could hold a rifle, regardless of the color line the Marine Corps had drawn. Iwo Jima represented one of the most challenging objectives American forces would face in the Pacific War. The island measured just 8 square miles, roughly the size of Manhattan from Wall Street to Central Park, but Japanese commanders had spent months transforming it into a fortress. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commanded the Japanese defense, and he had studied American amphibious tactics carefully. He knew the United States typically won beach assaults through overwhelming firepower and rapid inland advance. Kuribayashi designed his defense to neutralize both advantages. Rather than defending at the waterline where naval gunfire could destroy them, Japanese troops dug into the island's interior. They constructed 11 miles of underground tunnels connecting over 1,500 fortified positions. Concrete pillboxes with walls up to 3 feet thick housed machine guns and artillery. Cave complexes carved into Mount Suribachi's volcanic rock created firing positions that were nearly impossible to destroy. Kuribayashi had 21,000 troops under his command: Marines, naval infantry, and army units. He gave them explicit orders: every man will resist until the end, making his position his tomb. We will defend this island with our lives and inflict maximum casualties on the Americans before their inevitable victory. American intelligence underestimated the challenge. Pre-invasion assessments predicted the island would be secured in 5 days. Naval bombardment would soften defenses. Marines would land, push inland, and overwhelmed the outnumbered Japanese garrison quickly. These predictions ignored the reality of Kuribayashi's defenses and the determination of Japanese troops to fight to the death. They also ignored the mathematical reality of casualties. American planners estimated 50% casualties among assault troops, meaning half of all Marines landing on Iwo Jima would be killed or wounded. This casualty rate created a logistics problem that would eventually involve black Marines in ways military planners had not anticipated. Iwo Jima required constant resupply of ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, and equipment. The volcanic sand beaches made vehicle movement difficult. Supplies had to be manually unloaded from landing craft, moved across beaches, and transported to frontline units, all under Japanese artillery fire. The 8th Marine Field Depot, the 33rd, 34th, and 36th Marine Depot Companies, and the 8th Ammunition Company, all black Marine units, were assigned to support operations. Their mission: keep supplies flowing to combat troops regardless of enemy fire, beach conditions, or casualties. What planners did not account for was that support operations on Iwo Jima would mean operating in a combat zone where the distinction between frontline and rear area did not exist. The entire island was a battlefield. Every position was within range of Japanese artillery. Supply personnel would face the same dangers as infantry and would need to fight back when attacked. At 0900 hours on February 19, 1945, the first wave of Marines hit the beaches. Volcanic black sand made footing treacherous. Landing craft struggled to reach shore as waves pushed them sideways. Marines jumped into water, waded through surf, and encountered terrain unlike anything they had trained for. The volcanic sand was not like normal beach sand. Boots sank 6 inches with every step. Wheeled vehicles became stuck immediately. Tracked vehicles struggled. The steep terraces rising from the waterline created natural barriers that channeled Marines into predetermined killing zones. For the first hour, Japanese defenders held their fire. American commanders, accustomed to immediate resistance on Pacific beaches, found the silence unnerving. Then, as more Marines landed and the beaches became crowded with men and equipment, Japanese artillery opened up. Mortars and artillery shells rained down on beaches packed with Marines. Machine gun fire from hidden positions swept landing zones. The casualties predicted in planning estimates began accumulating with terrifying speed. Within hours, wounded men covered beach aid stations. Dead Marines lay where they had fallen, waiting for burial details that could not keep pace with the killing. The supply situation became critical immediately. Combat units advancing inland needed constant ammunition resupply. Artillery batteries firing in support consumed shells faster than landing craft could deliver them. Medical units required plasma, bandages, and morphine. Every necessity had to cross those beaches under fire. This was where Black Marines entered the battle in force. The depot and ammunition companies began landing on D-Day, tasked with establishing supply dumps, unloading landing craft, and moving materials to forward units. They landed expecting to perform support duties. They encountered a combat zone where support meant working under artillery fire while Japanese snipers targeted anyone moving on the beaches. The 8th Ammunition Company, composed entirely of Black Marines except for white officers, began operations within hours of the initial landing. Their job was to establish ammunition supply points, unload shells from landing craft, and transport ammunition to artillery batteries and frontline units. The work was brutally physical. Artillery shells weighed up to 90 pounds each, and it had to be done while under constant enemy fire. Historical records document that ammunition handlers suffered casualties comparable to infantry units during the battle's early days. Japanese artillery targeted beach supply areas deliberately, knowing that destroying American ammunition would cripple the assault. Black Marines unloading supplies became casualties simply by being on the beaches where shells fell indiscriminately. One Marine officer recorded in his after-action report, "Negro Marines of Ammunition Company performed duties under fire with exceptional courage. Several were wounded while unloading landing craft. They continued working until physically unable to do so. Their dedication to mission was indistinguishable from frontline infantry. But the situation deteriorated beyond supply operations. As casualties mounted among infantry units, the distinction between combat and support roles began to blur. Black Marines assigned to depot companies found themselves manning defensive positions when Japanese counterattacks threatened supply areas. Ammunition handlers picked up rifles to defend supply dumps when infiltrators attempted sabotage. The Marine Corps' careful segregation policy, designed to keep Black Marines away from combat, collapsed under Iwo Jima's brutal reality. When a Japanese squad attacked a supply position, the Marines defending it did not check skin color before returning fire. When a position needed defending and every rifle counted, commanders stopped worrying about racial integration policies. One Black Marine corporal later recalled, "They told us we were not good enough to fight." Then on Iwo Jima, when the Japanese came at our position, nobody cared what color we were. They handed us rifles and said, "Hold this line." We held it. By D-Day's end, several Black Marines had been killed in action. Many more were wounded. They died and bled doing the same work, facing the same dangers as white Marines, except without the official recognition that they were serving in combat roles. The casualty reports listed them as depot company or ammunition company casualties, not combat infantry casualties. But the bullets and shells that killed them did not distinguish between support troops and assault troops. Neither did the work they performed under fire. The battle for Iwo Jima did not follow American predictions. The 5-day estimate proved catastrophically wrong. Days stretched into weeks. Casualties mounted beyond initial projections. Black Marine units continued their supply operations under conditions that deteriorated daily. The beaches, already difficult terrain, became death traps as Japanese artillery zeroed in on landing zones. Supplying frontline units required moving through areas under constant observation and fire. The 36th Marine Depot Company, assigned to operate supply dumps just inland from the beaches, suffered casualties that forced them into defensive combat repeatedly. When Japanese infiltrators attacked at night, seeking to destroy American supplies, Depot Company Marines fought them off with small arms and grenades. These were not trained infantry tactics. They were desperate defensive actions by support troops forced into combat roles. One senior Marine officer observed the situation and recorded, "The distinction between combat and support troops has become meaningless on Iwo Jima. Every Marine on this island is in combat regardless of his assigned specialty. Negro Marines in depot companies have performed combat duties with courage equal to any troops under my command." The ammunition companies faced particularly dangerous work. Artillery batteries consumed shells at unprecedented rates during the sustained fighting. Ammunition handlers had to maintain constant supply flow, moving heavy shells from beach dumps to gun positions while under fire. Japanese artillery deliberately targeted ammunition supply routes, knowing that disrupting American fire support would give defenders an advantage. Historical records document specific instances of Black Marines distinguishing themselves under fire. When a landing craft loaded with ammunition took a direct hit near the beach, nearby ammunition handlers rushed into the water to prevent secondary explosions and recover what they could while under continued artillery fire. When Japanese troops infiltrated American lines and threatened a supply dump, Black Marines organized its defense and held their position through a night-long firefight. These actions went largely unrecognized at the time. Black Marines who performed combat duties were not recommended for combat decorations because officially they were not serving in combat roles. They were supply personnel who happened to be shooting at the enemy, defending positions, and dying under fire. But the paperwork classified them differently. The Japanese, meanwhile, discovered their intelligence assessments about American Negro troops were wrong. Captured Japanese documents from Iwo Jima indicate surprise that Black Americans were present in combat zones and were fighting effectively. One captured diary from a Japanese soldier noted, Negro American troops observed fighting near supply areas. Previous intelligence indicated these troops were non-combatants. They fight as aggressively as white Americans. By the battle's third week, several Black Marines had been killed in action and dozens more wounded. The casualty rate among ammunition and depot companies approached that of some infantry units, reflecting the reality that on Iwo Jima, everyone was in combat, regardless of official designation. One particularly deadly incident involved an ammunition dump that took a direct hit from Japanese artillery. The resulting explosion killed or wounded over a dozen Marines, most of them Black ammunition handlers who had been working to resupply frontline artillery. The explosion was visible across much of the island, a reminder that supply operations on Iwo Jima were as dangerous as any infantry assault. The physical demands combined with constant danger created conditions that broke some men and revealed the extraordinary resilience of others. Black Marines continued working 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer, moving supplies under fire, defending positions when attacked, and maintaining the logistics that allowed the battle to continue. A white Marine officer commanding a depot company later testified, I went into this assignment believing Negro Marines were suitable only for manual labor. After Iwo Jima, I know I was completely wrong. The men under my command performed as well as any Marines I have served with. Several deserve combat decorations they will never receive because of how the Marine Corps classifies their units. The battle for Iwo Jima officially ended on March 26, 1945, 36 days after the initial landing. American casualties totaled 26,000. Including nearly 7,000 killed. Almost every Marine who landed on Iwo Jima was either killed or wounded, making it proportionally the costliest battle in Marine Corps history. Among those casualties were Black Marines whose service challenged the segregation policies that had tried to keep them out of combat. Exact casualty figures for Black Marines on Iwo Jima remain incomplete in historical records, partly because they were listed under depot and ammunition companies rather than combat units. But available documentation indicates at least several dozen were killed or wounded. More significantly, their service under fire demonstrated that the Marine Corps' racial segregation policy was based on prejudice rather than military necessity. Black Marines had performed combat duties when required. They had defended positions, fought off attacks, and continued working under fire that would have justified any soldier seeking cover. They had done everything asked of them except receive recognition for it. Let us talk about what it actually cost to prove racist assumptions wrong. The combined casualty figures tell part of the story. The 92nd Infantry Division in Italy, 2,187 casualties, 419 killed, 1,611 wounded, 157 missing. The 93rd Infantry Division in the Pacific, 548 killed in action, 2,164 wounded, 118 missing or captured over 15 months of combat operations. Black Marines on Iwo Jima, at least several dozen killed or wounded. Exact figures incomplete, because they were not classified as combat casualties, but those numbers do not capture the full cost. For the soldiers of these units, it was not just fighting the enemy, it was fighting the environment itself and the racism of their own military simultaneously. In Italy, temperatures ranged from 110 degrees in Arizona training grounds to 10 degrees below zero in the Apennine Mountains. Soldiers climbed near vertical slopes carrying 60 pounds of equipment while being shot at. They fought through blizzards, rain, and mud. Trench foot was epidemic. Frostbite took fingers and toes. And all of this while using equipment that was deliberately inferior to what white units received. In the Pacific, jungle warfare was arguably the most brutal combat environment of World War II. Malaria infected nearly every soldier at some point. Even with preventive medicine, the disease was endemic. Soldiers would fight through fever, chills, and delirium, then recover just in time to be infected again. Some soldiers contracted malaria 3 or 4 times during their tour. Dengue fever, dysentery, fungal infections, tropical ulcers, all were constant threats. Your feet would rot inside your boots from constant moisture. Leeches would attach to any exposed skin. Insects carried diseases. Water was often contaminated. And then there was the heat. Temperatures in the jungle regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit with near 100% humidity. Carrying 60 to 70 pounds of equipment, ammunition, and weapons in that heat was physically devastating. Heat stroke was common. Dehydration was a constant battle. The terrain itself was dangerous. Soldiers would slip on muddy trails and fall down ravines. Rivers could flood suddenly, drowning soldiers or sweeping away equipment. Mountains required climbing while under fire. The jungle was so dense that units would lose contact with each other just 50 yards apart. On Iwo Jima, the volcanic sand made every step exhausting. Boots sank 6 inches with every step. Artillery shells fell constantly on beaches where there was no cover. Supplies had to be moved manually because vehicles could not navigate the terrain. And all of this while Japanese snipers targeted anyone who moved. But beyond the physical challenges, there was an additional psychological burden that white soldiers did not carry. For the soldiers of the 92nd, 93rd, and the Black Marines, they knew they were under scrutiny. They knew that every failure would be magnified, every mistake used to justify continued segregation. They carried the weight of representing their entire race. One veteran of the 93rd interviewed decades later said, "We could not just be good soldiers. We had to be perfect. One white unit could fail, and it is just that unit. If we failed, people would say, 'See, black men cannot fight.'" That pressure never went away, not for one day. Despite this pressure, or perhaps because of it, these units maintained high performance standards. Their discipline under fire was noted by commanders. Their tactical execution was sound. Their morale, despite everything, remained strong. But it came at a cost. Soldiers pushed themselves past exhaustion. They fought through injuries that should have sent them to hospitals. They volunteered for dangerous patrols because they did not want to be seen as shirking. They took risks that more established units might not have taken because they were constantly trying to prove themselves. The racism did not stop during combat either. White officers, even those in the same division, sometimes treated black soldiers with condescension. Supply issues often meant black units received older equipment or were last in line for replacements. When white units and black units served in the same area, segregation was maintained. Separate mess facilities, separate recreation areas, and the recognition did not come. While these units were fighting in the Pacific and Italy, American newspapers were full of stories about white divisions in Europe. The 101st Airborne at Bastogne, the Marines at Iwo Jima, meaning the White Marine Infantry Regiments. These became household names. The 92nd Infantry Division, the 93rd Infantry Division, the Black Marines. They were barely mentioned. When they were covered in the press, it was often brief, buried in back sections, or framed as surprising that black soldiers could fight effectively. The soldiers knew this was happening. They could read newspapers. They could listen to radio broadcasts. They knew their achievements were being minimized or ignored. One soldier wrote in a letter home, "We have killed more Japanese than some units get credit for destroying. But you will not read about us in Life magazine. You will not see our pictures in the newsreels. It is like we are invisible except when they need someone to fight." Despite all of this, the disease, the terrain, the enemy, the racism, the lack of recognition, these units continued to perform at the highest level for months of continuous combat operations. They did it because they understood what was at stake. They were fighting two wars, the obvious one against Axis forces and the longer war against American racism. Every successful operation chipped away at the justifications for segregation. Every casualty they inflicted proved the lie of racial inferiority. They knew they might not receive recognition. They knew they would probably go home to the same discrimination they had left behind. But they also knew that future generations of Black Americans would benefit from what they were proving. And they proved it in blood. The 92nd Infantry Division shattered the Gothic Line that had held against repeated Allied assaults. German commanders who laughed at the deployment of Negro troops sent urgent messages revising their intelligence assessments. Nazi racial theories met reality in the mountains of Italy, and reality won. The 93rd Infantry Division inflicted over 12,000 casualties on Japanese forces across 3 major campaigns, not through superior numbers. The Japanese often had numerical advantages in individual engagements, not through better equipment. The 93rd often had older or inferior gear, but through superior training, discipline, courage, and determination. Black Marines on Iwo Jima performed combat duties. They were officially prohibited from performing. They held defensive positions. They fought off infiltrators. They continued supply operations under fire that would have justified any soldier seeking cover. And they did it without official recognition because the paperwork said they were not combat troops. Now, let us talk about what racism cost the Axis powers. The Japanese military's racist assumptions about black soldiers got thousands of their own troops killed. They underestimated an enemy based on skin color, and that underestimation had strategic consequences. When Japanese commanders dismissed the 93rd Infantry Division as inferior troops, they made tactical errors. They attacked when they should have defended. They used light forces when they needed heavy. They expected easy victories and got grinding defeats. Racism made them worse fighters. It clouded their judgment. It caused them to misallocate resources and misread situations. The Japanese would have been more effective if they had assessed the 93rd objectively rather than through a racist lens. German forces at the Gothic Line made the same mistake. They positioned forces believing black troops would collapse under artillery fire, never reaching their main defensive line. When those assumptions proved wrong, they were caught unprepared. Von Schweinberg had to send urgent messages revising German intelligence. Kesselring had to acknowledge that Negro units demonstrated combat effectiveness equal to white divisions. Previous assessments based on racial theory were incorrect, but by then, it was too late. The Gothic Line was broken. Monte Belvedere, Monte Castello, Monte della Torraccia, all three peaks that anchored the Western Gothic Line, had fallen to troops Nazi propaganda said could not fight. The cost to Axis forces was not just tactical defeats. It was strategic failure based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about human capability and racial hierarchy. And there is another cost we must acknowledge: the cost to America itself. The soldiers of the 92nd Division, the 93rd Division, and the Black Marines proved they could fight at the highest level. They destroyed enemy forces. They held territory. They completed every mission assigned to them. They did it while facing discrimination from their own military. And America's response was to minimize their achievements, maintain segregation, and deny them recognition for decades. Think about the talent that was wasted by segregation. The 92nd was one division. The 93rd was one division. The Black Marines were a tiny fraction of Marine Corps strength. Imagine if the United States military had integrated from the start of the war. How many more black soldiers could have contributed in combat roles? How many lives might have been saved if the military had utilized all available talent without regard to race? These unit stories prove that segregation was not just morally wrong. It was strategically stupid. It limited the military's effectiveness. It wasted human potential. It made America weaker. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrenders. World War II is over. The 92nd Infantry Division, the 93rd Infantry Division, and the Black Marines begin the process of demobilization. Soldiers who have spent years in combat, who have proven themselves on the world's most brutal battlefields, prepare to return home. There are no victory parades for these units, no ticker tape celebrations in New York, no front-page newspaper coverage of their return. They are processed through quickly and sent home to a country that largely does not know they existed. Why? The same reason these stories have been buried for 80 years. These achievements complicate narratives that America wanted to tell about itself. In the immediate post-war years, Hollywood began churning out World War II films. Battleground, 12 O'Clock High, Sands of Iwo Jima. Dozens of movies celebrating American military victories. None of them featured black combat soldiers. When black soldiers appeared in World War II films at all, they were in service roles: cooks, drivers, laborers. The combat was done by white soldiers. The heroism was white heroism. The official military histories published in the 1950s and 1960s gave these black units minimal coverage. The multi-volume United States Army in World War II series includes brief mentions, a few pages at most, often focusing on supposed problems rather than achievements. The narrative that emerged was that black units were acceptable in support roles, but struggled in combat, that they required more white officers to maintain discipline, that they were not as effective as white units. This narrative was racist nonsense contradicted by actual combat records. But it served a purpose. It justified continued segregation in the military. If black soldiers could not fight as well as white soldiers, then integration was not necessary. The truth, that these divisions had compiled some of the most impressive combat records of the war, was inconvenient. So it was minimized, downplayed, or simply ignored. For decades, this history existed only in military archives, after-action reports, casualty lists, unit histories that few people ever read. The veterans themselves told their stories to their families, their communities. But mainstream American history forgot them. This was not unique to these units. Virtually all black combat units from World War II were erased from popular history. The 761st Tank Battalion, the Tuskegee Airmen received some recognition, But even that took decades. The systematic erasure had real consequences. When debates about military integration occurred in 1948, opponents could point to the lack of evidence that black soldiers could perform effectively in combat roles. They could claim there was no history of successful black combat units. Of course, there was history. The 92nd Division was that history. The 93rd Division was that history. The Black Marines were that history. But it had been buried. The erasure continued for generations. History textbooks barely mentioned black military service. Television documentaries about World War II would spend hours on European campaigns and maybe 5 minutes on the contributions of black units. It was not until the 1980s and 1990s that historians began systematically recovering these stories. Researchers interviewed surviving veterans. They dug through National Archives records. They found the after-action reports, the casualty statistics, the commendations that had been filed and forgotten. Slowly, the true stories began to emerge. Books were published. Academic papers were written. Eventually, documentaries were made. Recognition came, but it came late. Painfully, inexcusably late. 7 members of the 92nd Infantry Division earned the Medal of Honor, though 6 awards were not approved until the 1990s. Vernon Baker, whose courage on Monte Belvedere was undeniable, received the Distinguished Service Cross in 1945, downgraded from Medal of Honor recommendation. Only in 1997, 52 years later, was his award upgraded. He was the only living recipient among the 7. Vernon Baker, receiving his Medal of Honor in 1997 at age 77, addressed the ceremony directly. The award is welcome, but it is 52 years late. 7 of U.S. earned this honor. 6 had to die before America saw fit to give it to them. That tells you everything about the country we fought for and the country we came home to. The Montford Point Marines, the first generation of black Marines who trained in segregated facilities and served in segregated units, received formal recognition in 2012 when they were collectively awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. 2012, 67 years after the war ended. By then, most Montford Point Marines had passed away. The recognition came too late for the men who had stormed Iwo Jima's beaches, who had worked under fire, who had fought when needed despite being told they were not good enough for combat. They had waited nearly 70 years for acknowledgement that their service mattered. In 2022, 77 years after the war ended, the 93rd Infantry Division was awarded a Congressional Gold Medal alongside other black units that served in World War II. Only a handful of veterans were still alive to receive it. Most had died, never seeing official recognition for what they had accomplished. The soldiers returned to an America where victory abroad had not won equality at home. Black soldiers who fought through the Gothic Line came home to segregated buses, Jim Crow laws, and legal discrimination. Many were denied GI Bill benefits. Some were attacked for wearing uniforms in southern states. Private Hicks, who survived Monte Belvedere, was refused service at a Georgia diner 3 months after returning. When he protested, showing his combat infantryman's badge and Purple Heart, police beat him. Private Hicks said years later, "I took Monte Belvedere, but I could not get a hamburger in my own country." Yet the legacy endured. Their success contributed to arguments for military integration. President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948, which desegregated the armed forces, cited black units' combat record as evidence segregation weakened military effectiveness. Today, the United States military is one of the most successfully integrated institutions in American society. Black Americans serve at every level, in every role, in every branch. The idea that black soldiers are inferior fighters is recognized as the racist absurdity it always was. That integration did not happen because the military suddenly developed a conscience. It happened because units like the 92nd Division, the 93rd Division, and the Black Marines made segregation indefensible. They proved through their combat record that race had nothing to do with fighting ability. They paid for that proof in blood. Today, Monte Belvedere stands quiet. A memorial erected in 1995 bears the names of those who died. The inscription is simple. They proved themselves here. The jungles of Bougainville have reclaimed the battlefields where the 93rd fought. The beaches of Iwo Jima remain volcanic black sand where black Marines died doing work they were told they were not qualified for. These places remember what history tried to forget. Vernon Baker, interviewed before his 2010 death, was asked what he wanted people to remember. His answer captures everything. Remember that we volunteered to fight for a country that treated us as second-class citizens. Remember that we proved ourselves against an enemy who thought we were inferior while serving in an army that agreed. Remember that we took mountains white units had failed to take, then came home to a country where we could not vote, could not get jobs, could not live where we wanted. But remember, most of all, that we did it anyway. We fought anyway. We proved ourselves anyway. The story of these black soldiers is ultimately about human dignity and refusing to accept limitations imposed by prejudice. They climbed those mountains, fought through those jungles, worked under fire on those beaches, carrying the aspirations of millions of black Americans demanding recognition of their full humanity. The Germans laughed at the deployment of black troops to Monte Belvedere. The laughter died in the mountains, drowned out by men who refused to quit, refused to break, refused to accept anyone's judgment of their worth except their own. The Japanese said black soldiers were cowards and dropped propaganda leaflets promising better treatment. Then they lost 12,000 soldiers to those supposed cowards across 15 months of brutal jungle warfare. The Marine Corps said black men were not good enough for combat, then watched them fight and die on Iwo Jima performing duties. They were officially prohibited from performing. They were told they could not fight. They were given the worst assignments. They were expected to fail. Instead, they broke the Gothic Line. They destroyed Japanese forces across 3 Pacific campaigns. They kept the ammunition flowing on Iwo Jima under fire that killed indiscriminately. And they changed history, not immediately, not with recognition, not with parades or medals or newspaper headlines. They changed history slowly, painfully. One battle at a time, one casualty at a time, one shattered assumption at a time. Racism cost the Axis powers thousands of casualties, because their commanders underestimated enemies based on skin color. Racism cost America decades of wasted potential because it refused to utilize all its citizens' talents. Racism cost these soldiers recognition they earned and deserved. But racism could not stop them from proving what they knew all along, that courage has no color, that excellence requires only training, discipline, and determination, that when bullets start flying, what matters is the person next to you, not the color of their skin. The Japanese learned that lesson at a cost of 12,000 casualties. The Germans learned it in the mountains of Italy. The Marine Corps learned it on Iwo Jima's beaches. America should have learned it too, but took decades longer. At least now, 80 years later, we are finally telling these stories properly. Remember the 92nd Infantry Division. Remember the 93rd Infantry Division. Remember the Black Marines of Iwo Jima. Remember what they proved. Remember what it cost them. Remember that they fought 2 wars simultaneously and won both. Even if recognition took 70 years to arrive, their service on volcanic beaches under fire that did not distinguish by race, in mountain snows that froze everyone equally, in jungles that killed without prejudice, stands as testimony to courage that transcends the racism that tried to deny it. These are the soldiers the enemy never expected. The heroes history tried to forget, the proof that human capability cannot be limited by the color lines that prejudice tries to draw. If this story matters to you, if you believe these histories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Comment below with which forgotten story you want to hear next. The algorithm buries these truths unless people engage. Help us make sure the 92nd, the 93rd, and the Black Marines are not forgotten again. They fought for a country that denied them equality. They proved themselves to enemies who dismissed them and allies who doubted them. They earned recognition that came generations too late. The least we can do is remember their names, tell their stories, and ensure that courage, wherever it appears. They were told they were not good enough. They proved otherwise. In blood, in fire, in victory. That is the story. That is the truth. That is what they deserve us to remember.